You sit at the head of the long table, the polished mahogany cool under your palms, and the air in the situation room tastes of yesterday's coffee and the sharp, metallic tang of fear. The photographs are laid before you under the unforgiving lights. Grainy black and white images of missile trailers and canvas-covered cylinders baking in the Cuban sun, and General LeMay leans in, his finger stabbing the glossy paper, his voice a gravelly bark saying the sites will be operational in days. The room holds its breath as LeMay's words hang in the smoke-filled air, and you watch McNamara adjust his rimless glasses, his calm, analytical voice outlining the casualty estimates for an airstrike on Cuba and the near certainty of a Soviet move against Berlin. You feel your brother Bobby's gaze from across the table, a silent anchor, and for a moment you are back in the dark Pacific, feeling the PT-109 splinter, understanding how quickly control can be ripped away. You order the U-2s to fly again at dawn, buying a few more hours. The order hangs in the air, and for a moment, the only sound is the frantic clatter of a teletype machine in the corner as men shift in their leather chairs, their eyes avoiding yours and settling on the maps. McNamara picks up a red phone to relay the command to the Air Force, his voice a low, precise monotone, and you watch the clock above the door, its second hand sweeping toward a dawn that now feels like a deadline, the first grains of an hourglass tipping. The second set of photographs arrives with the morning light, and they confirm everything you feared, showing the missile sites assembled with a speed that steals the air from the room. LeMay stands over the table, his cigar smoke coiling in the harsh light, and he says, "The window for a clean strike is closing, that the only language Khrushchev understands is force," and the other generals nod in grim unison, their certainty building a wall of pressure that pushes against your chest. You listen as the general's grim chorus fills the room, like the acrid smoke from LeMay's cigar, and you feel the polished wood of the table cool under your palms against the heat of the argument. Bobby catches your eye from across the room, his pale face a silent anchor in the storm, and you lean forward against the familiar ache in your back. Your voice cuts through the haze as you ask for the blockade option, the naval quarantine, buying time not for war, but for a way out. The room erupts into a low, tense debate, with McNamara translating your idea into logistical terms of ship deployments and interception protocols, and Adlai Stevenson speaks from the far end of the table, his weary voice pleading for a path that leaves room for diplomacy. You watch the faces around you, the flicker of doubt in some, and the hardened resolve in others, and you feel the decision crystallizing within you, a fragile thing taking shape against the overwhelming gravity of the alternative. You send Bobby to meet the Soviet ambassador in a back room of the Justice Department, a tense and secretive encounter where the air is thick with unspoken threats, and he returns looking pale, reporting only more ambiguity and a warning that Khrushchev will not back down. The news settles in the room like a cold fog, and you look at the faces of your advisors, seeing the last door to a peaceful resolution seeming to swing shut, leaving only the military options glowing red on the map. You sit alone at the table after the others have filed out, the silence of physical relief after the hours of argument, and you stare at the map where the red circles mark the missile sites, tracing the arc they could travel to American cities. The weight of the decision is yours alone now, a cold stone in your gut, and you think of the speech you must give to the nation, the words that will either freeze the world in place or set it irrevocably on fire. You address the nation from behind the Oval Office desk, your voice steady, as you announce the naval quarantine, and the camera feels like a gun barrel as you look into it, telling millions of families about the missiles 90 miles from Florida. The words you practiced sound foreign in the silent room, a formal declaration of a brink you can still see across. And when the red light on the camera blinks off, the silence that follows is deeper and more profound than any that came before. The world watches and waits, and the next 48 hours are a blur of intercepted ship manifests and tense situation room updates, where every new cable from Moscow is analyzed for a hidden meaning, and every radar blip off Cuba is a potential trigger. You sleep in snatches in a chair, the back brace digging into your ribs, and you drink cold coffee while staring at the map, where your destroyers form a thin, fragile line between the Soviet freighters and the open sea. A colonel enters just after dawn, his face ashen, and lays a single sheet of paper on the table that says a U-2 is missing over Cuba, and the confirmation follows minutes later in a terse sentence that says the pilot is dead, which sends General LeMay to his feet with his face flushed and his voice a roar in the suddenly still room, demanding an immediate retaliatory strike. And for a long moment you stare at the map where the red circles bloom, the simplicity of his violent solution, a dark and seductive current pulling at your resolve. LeMay's demand hangs in the air like a challenge, and you see every face in the room turn to you, waiting for the order that will cross the final line, your hand aching from gripping the table's edge as you remember the weight of your sleeping son in your arms just hours before, that perfect and trusting warmth, and you do not look away from the general, but your voice, when it comes, is quiet and final as you tell him you will not trade a pilot for a war. The silence after your refusal is thick and hostile, and General LeMay stares at you with a contempt that feels like a physical blow before he turns and stalks from the room, the door clicking shut with a sound of final judgment. The others avoid your gaze, the weight of the dead pilot now a ghost in the room, and you turn to the map, where the Soviet ships are still steaming toward your thin line of destroyers, the clock ticking down toward a collision you can no longer predict or control. The hours after LeMay leaves stretch into a tense, silent vigil, where the only sounds are the chatter of the teletype and the low murmur of McNamara updating the ship positions, and you sit motionless, staring at the map as the red markers representing the Soviet convoy inch closer to the blue arc of your blockade. You feel the world narrowing to this single, approaching line on the chart, a seam where two futures meet, and you wait for the signal that will tell you which one you have chosen. The teletype machine stutters to life with a sound like a cracking bone, and everyone in the room freezes, watching the paper unspool with the slow, terrible certainty of a verdict. McNamara is the first to move, snatching the message, and his face, usually an impassive mask of data, goes slack for a fraction of a second before he reads the words aloud, his voice stripped of all its analytical calm, saying the lead Soviet ship has stopped dead in the water 10 miles from the quarantine line. The news of the ship stopping hits the room like a sudden drop in air pressure, and for a long moment, no one speaks. The silence filled only with the hum of the lights and the fading rattle of the teletype. Then, a low murmur begins, a mixture of disbelief and a raw, guttering hope, and you watch the men around the table exchange glances, their shoulders loosening from a tension that had become a part of them, as if they are all remembering how to breathe. The relief is a dangerous, intoxicating thing, and you force yourself to stay seated, your hands flat on the table to stop them from shaking, because you know Khrushchev has not turned his ships around, only stopped them, and the missiles are still in their Cuban fields, pointed at your cities. Bobby leans close, his voice for your ear alone, reminding you that a pause is not a deal, and you nod, your eyes fixed on the map where the red markers hover like a held breath. The pause stretches into a new kind of agony, a limbo where every minute feels borrowed, and you order McNamara to have the Navy hold position, to make no move that could be seen as provocation. You send for Adlai Stevenson, his weary elegance a stark contrast to the room's military tension, and you ask him to draft the language for the UN, a public plea for reason that you know is your last card to play before the ships either turn or start moving again. Stevenson works through the night, the scratch of his pen the only sound in the small side office, and you pace the carpet, the words of the UN speech taking shape as a final public gambit. You know it must be a masterpiece of pressure and persuasion, a trap Khrushchev can walk into with dignity, and you feel the weight of the world narrowing to this single document, this fragile thread of words you will throw across the abyss that has opened between the two fleets. The draft of the UN speech is in your hands, the paper cool and heavy, and you read Stevenson's careful phrases that offer a ladder for Khrushchev to climb down, a public deal wrapped in the language of peace. You sit alone in the dim light of the side office, the words blurring before your tired eyes, and you understand this is the last quiet moment before you commit to this path, before you stake everything on the hope that the man in the Kremlin wants a way out as badly as you do. You place Stevenson's draft on the scarred table and explain the plan to take Khrushchev's first offer and ignore the second, your voice steady in the harsh light, and you watch as General LeMay's face darkens and he slams a meaty hand down, making the coffee cups rattle, his voice a gravelly roar saying this is a betrayal of every man in uniform, that you are trading American security for a coward's peace, and the room holds its breath, waiting for your answer. You return to the Situation Room as the first gray light of dawn bleeds into the sky, and the men around the table look up from their maps with faces etched by exhaustion, and you place Stevenson's draft on the scarred wood, your voice steady as you explain you will take Khrushchev's first offer and ignore the second. General LeMay's face darkens, and he slams a meaty hand down, making the coffee cups rattle, his voice a gravelly roar calling it a betrayal, and the room holds its breath. You dictate the final terms of the cable to Moscow, your voice hoarse but clear in the silent room, offering the secret withdrawal of the Jupiter missiles from Turkey in return for the dismantling of the sites in Cuba. And you feel the eyes of every man on you, measuring your resolve. You hand the text to Kenny, who moves with the quiet urgency of a man carrying a live grenade. And then there is nothing to do but wait as the message travels across the wire into the Soviet dawn. The wait after the cable is sent is a slow, cold torture, and you sit motionless at the head of the table, watching the second-hand sweep around the clock on the wall, each tick a hammer fall in the silent room. You can feel the Soviet ships hanging motionless in the Atlantic 10 miles from your line, and you can feel the missiles in Cuba, their warheads a latent heat on the edge of your vision, and you understand that all the power in the world has narrowed to this single, excruciating pause. The silence is absolute, broken only by the dry creak of a leather chair and the relentless tick of the wall clock, and you press your thumb into the polished wood of the table, feeling the grain against your skin as you stare at the map where the red ship icons hover, the ache in your back fused with the weight of the decision, and you do not move, you do not blink, for what feels like a lifetime until the teletype machine erupts with a violent, shattering clatter. The teletype machine erupts with a sudden, violent clatter that makes every man in the room flinch, and you watch the paper jerk and stutter as it spills onto the floor, a white tongue bearing the only words that matter. McNamara is there in 2 strides, his hand trembling slightly as he tears the sheet free, and his eyes scan the lines of coded text once, then twice, before he looks up at you, and in his face you see not victory, but a release so profound, it looks like pain. McNamara reads the reply aloud, his voice a flat monotone that cannot hide the tremor underneath, and the words say the Soviet ships will turn back, and the missiles in Cuba will be dismantled under UN supervision. The room remains perfectly still, the news too vast and fragile to absorb, and you look at the faces of the men around you, seeing the same stunned, hollowed-out relief you feel, a recognition that the world has just stepped back from a ledge. It will spend the rest of its life remembering. You walk out into the rose garden alone, the autumn air cool and sweet with the smell of damp earth and fallen leaves, and you stand there for a long time, letting the silence of the morning wash over you, a silence no longer charged with impending doom, but hollowed out by a relief so profound it feels like grief. You look at the sky, a clear, pale blue, and you understand you have just lived through the future you prevented, and that the world will never feel as light or as innocent again.